this. I left the city, I've been browsing, treading water that they drowning. My head on the swivel, yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 169 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at DynastyDadFF. Joining me as always is my co-host, Mung. How you doing tonight, brother?
Hey, doing well. We're about, 19 rounds through our Scott Fishbowl draft. So getting down to those random guys that a lot of people have never even heard of at this point in the offseason. And I've been watching the quarterback show on Netflix with my wife, and it's interesting seeing, the behind the scenes of some of this stuff, and then also just the more interpersonal relationships, right? I mean, it's easy to dunk on Mahomes' wife for some, video segments that get clipped online, or it's easy to immediately skip to the fantasy impact of Desmond Ridder taking over the starting job and glossing over, Mariota as a person and his feelings and all that. So it's definitely an interesting show, but we're here to talk fantasy, so we'll get into that side of things.
Yeah, I love it. And then one of our favorite guests, started out, we've been talking together so long in the industry. One of our best friends at Smash Accept has really just blown up over at Football Guys. My man, Dave Kluge. How you doing tonight?
Doing great. I actually tried busting out the Smash Accept shirt today, but it is still in the hamper from when we recorded a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't want to be stinking up my office here. But yeah, man, I always love coming on this show. Always a really, really good time. So thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, we had a blast when we were on one of your last shows there on the launch pad. Talk to me a little bit about it. I know you have a new show out. I went and watched it, with you and Alfredo. It was awesome. So tell me a little bit about it.
Thank you. Well, Alfredo was doing the Pretend GM and I was doing the Launchpad, and they were kind of similar vibes to the shows. And then I would have Alfredo on my show frequently, and Alfredo would have me on his show frequently. And we noticed that when we were doing shows together, people seemed to like it a lot. So we ended up each scrapping our show, kind of combining forces. And now we are doing the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. We've got 3 shows coming out every single week in the preseason. And then once the season kicks off, we're going to be doing shows Monday through Thursday with another 5th show on Sunday mornings to help you out with all of your last minute start sit questions. So really excited for the opportunity there. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I watched the first show and I loved it, watching it on YouTube, seeing where you guys were talking about your guys where you didn't agree, and a lot of times on the show, John and I would agree on most things. Mung and I, we kind of go back and forth, and it just kind of helps set the tone of what the podcast is going to be like, what you guys are going to agree on, what you aren't going to agree on. And I loved it. So if you guys haven't seen it yet, make sure you guys go out there and check it out, because I'm sure there's some things tonight we're not going to agree on. Tonight's show, we're going to talk about the nuke news, and then we're going to talk about some not just hot takes, but some nuclear takes. So Dave, I want to start off first by talking about the DeAndre Hopkins news, right? I mean, it kind of shook us all. Mung was talking about Scott Fishbowl, and I got Tannehill, really late in that. He was one of the last quarterbacks to go, and a lot of guys really got a deal there. Treylon Burks has been everybody's, sweetheart, Chig as well at the tight end position. I mean, what was your instant reaction here? Because so many people we talk about it all the time on Smash Accept. We're playing the long game. We're not trying to do any kind of, emergency type sells or anything like that. So what's your instant reaction fantasy wise of the DeAndre Hopkins signing?
Well, first of all, I want to say you got lucky getting Tannehill, because I was the guy that took DeAndre Hopkins in SFB. And, I think that's probably the biggest loser from this. I mean, if you lined up all 32 teams, I couldn't imagine a worse landing spot than the Tennessee Titans. And, when I heard those rumors, I didn't really understand it, because where DeAndre Hopkins is at in his career, I mean, he's already made well over $100 million. The one thing missing from his resume is playoff success. But then I started thinking about it a little bit more, and this is one of those moves that is really good for football purposes. It's not going to bring us a lot of fantasy football goodness, unfortunately. I mean, we saw a 22, 23-year-old prime A.J. Brown struggling to do much in this offense. I don't know if DeAndre Hopkins is going to be able to do much better than what we saw from him, but he's going to be a chain mover there. He's probably going to see somewhere between 8 and 9 targets per game. I think the biggest winner from this, though, is Derrick Henry, because he has been seeing loaded fronts for the last few years. And now with DeAndre Hopkins there, they're going to have to start playing deep a little bit and make sure that DeAndre Hopkins can't get over the top there. So that's going to open up some opportunities for Derrick Henry who's also been much more involved in the passing game over the last couple of years. So Tannehill is obviously a winner here, getting that bona fide wide receiver one. But Derrick Henry is the guy that you got to move up your rankings after seeing this. We've been fading this guy year after year after year, waiting for the decline to happen, and he just keeps proving us wrong. So anybody putting Derrick Henry in their top 5, I might not agree with it, but I'm not going to push back too hard.
Yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry's second in the league in stacked boxes, over the last couple of years, only really behind Nick Chubb. And now, we get a situation where we add an extra wide receiver in there. We have a spot where, now Tennessee looks a little bit more viable. Mung, the thing that we've been talking about in the past, Will Levis being such a deal in our rookie drafts, like he kept moving back and back. Is this a scenario now where, Ryan Tannehill gets to start in 2023. The team looks a little bit better. And then they move to Will Levis next year, where now they're in a situation where they're not going to necessarily be in that top 5 range where we have to worry about what's going to happen with Will Levis.
I wouldn't change my expectations for Levis long-term, but certainly I do think he may not start in 2023. I think the biggest winner here is probably Tannehill, where early on this offseason, we were saying, well, if the Titans start 1-3 or 0-4 or whatever it might be, do they move on quickly to Levis to see what he has, or even, still give Malik Willis another shot? But at this point, I do think they'll at least keep games close. We saw that they took the Chiefs to overtime last year. They beat the Chiefs straight up 2 seasons ago. So I think the defense and the coaching is there under Vrabel. It's a tongue twister. That they are going to keep games close and potentially even still be in contention in that division. So I do think Tannehill deserves merit in superflex formats, both in redraft and dynasty, and certainly does bump Burks and Chigozie and Okonkwo down a little bit, because part of the appeal to those guys was volume.
And Tannehill was a guy that we had been screaming about in drafts, where he was going round 14 in dynasty startups, round 14. And this is still a guy who's had multiple QB1s on his resume, a guy who's played well and shown that he could be there. Dave, when we look at, we look at Chig, we look at Burks, 2 guys that we absolutely loved. They're Twitter darlings. Everybody was raging about them. And a lot of it really had to do with volume. Both of them highly talented players, but we were really anticipating the volume. So my instant reaction on Treylon Burks, who I love, I have him everywhere, whereas this isn't a sell point for Treylon Burks. I had so many people reaching out there selling for less than a 24 first. I'm like, we were predicting a breakout. I saw one where someone traded, it was Cortland Sutton in a 24 second. You're like, Treylon Burks is still a fantastic wide receiver. I think there's a situation here where now he gets to play, instead of the X, he gets to play on the opposite side, learn from DeAndre Hopkins. He flashed last year. He's the round 1 draft capital. And Chig, across the board, his efficiency at tight end last year was phenomenal. So how do you see this shaking out for both of these guys this year? Because that's the biggest question. Everyone's like panic selling these guys, but they're still young. They're still talented. And I think now is clearly not the time.
Yeah, I mean, I know you talk about it all the time, like playing the long game and not trying to, get too shaken up by these little microtransactions and things like that. And you said it, he's a first round pick. And at the end of the day, these are the guys you want to invest in, our first round wide receivers. So even if this does slightly bump down his 2023 projections, I'm not really panicking long term, because you still want to believe in the talent. And he is a very talented player. Like you said, showed a lot of flashes last year. So, in redraft 2023, in my best ball takes and things like that, I did knock him down about 6 spots. But I think what you talked about, getting the mentorship from DeAndre Hopkins, it could help him even more so long term. It could help take some pressure off of him. So I haven't changed my stance on Treylon Burks at all since this move. I had him as a buy all offseason, and if now I can buy him for even cheaper, I'm just continuing to try to buy him more.
I love that, because I moved him. He's in the same tier for me. I moved him from 21 to 24. He's still in that same area. I have him right in that area with like Michael Pittman, slightly behind Christian Watson, some players like that, who, he's a buy right now. And if you are in a rebuild mode, he's the perfect guy to go out there and buy, kick the tires, see what you can do. The biggest loser to me, Dave, is Mac Jones. So, right, we're talking about New England getting DeAndre Hopkins. Juju Smith-Schuster all of a sudden finds himself as the wide receiver 1 there. And now Mac Jones, who a lot of people are starting to come around a little bit, has arguably the worst wide receiver core in the NFL now.
Yeah, and I don't even know if Juju is going to be healthy. I mean, he's had that knee problem that's been bothering him all offseason. So,
Yeah.
if he ends up missing some time in training camp, I'm going to be even more worried. I'd say wheels up for Mike Gesicki if we're going to start talking about the
Yes.
Patriots a little bit. That's the guy that I'm excited about there. But yeah, man, it's a weird situation for Mac Jones. I think most people from the outside have looked at Mac Jones and said that he probably isn't the long-term solution, but Bill
Mm.
Belichick just has it in him that he is going to try to contend every single year, regardless of what the roster looks like. And they keep kind of pushing the chips in, even though they're running out of chips to push in. I don't really know what the long term outlook looks like for Mac, but it wouldn't surprise me if this is his last year as a starter.
And that's that Patriots way. I mean, that's Vrabel's the same thing, right? It's
Yep.
funny that they're tied together. I mean, it's like you think Tennessee when I first heard that was a landing spot for Nuke, I'm like, it's not happening. Like that just doesn't make any sense. But they just want to keep winning. They want to try to do their thing. I love talking about Nuke, but tonight's show we're talking about nuclear takes, man. We are talking about the hot takes, the ones that really are going to blow your mind. And Dave, you're former Chicago area guy. My hot take at quarterback was going to be Justin Fields. Over the last 2 years. 2 years ago, I said Jalen Hurts was going to be top 8. Last year, I said he was going to be 1 when we did our hot take show. Now we got Justin Fields. He's that new hotness. What is your hot take on Justin Fields?
You said you wanted some nuclear hot takes. I didn't want to come out here and throw something soft out there. So I figured I'd start really hot right off the bat. I think this year, not just long term, I'm not talking 5 years from now. I think this year, Justin Fields sets the all time Bears passing record. And while that might sound like a huge bar to clear, when you realize that it's Eric Kramer with 3,838 yards, it doesn't sound quite so intimidating anymore. And last year, we saw Justin Fields really show up as a rushing threat and rush for over 1,000 yards and solidify himself as maybe one of the best rushing quarterbacks in NFL history. But that's not his game, and that's not what he was drafted for. He was a great pocket passer at Ohio State and just didn't have the personnel last year to get it done. You see him at the end of games, force feeding balls to Amir Smith-Marset and Equanimous St. Brown and N'Keal Harry and guys that don't even have any business being on an NFL field, let alone in the final minutes of a fourth quarter close matchup. So this offseason, they went out and they completely revamped everything on the passing side. Not only did they trade for Chase Claypool last year, which we can laugh at the, what they got back in return, may not have been the best trade, but, I like that rather than just saying, well, we kind of whiffed on it, let's hope it works with Chase Claypool, they still went out this offseason and traded for DJ Moore. On top of that, they brought in Roschon Johnson, who specializes as a pass blocker. So that's going to help him get a little bit more time in the pocket. And then, of course, Darnell Wright, took him 10th overall in the draft. So they've done everything they can to try to beef up the pass game here in Chicago. And I like it because we know that he can pass the ball. We haven't seen it yet at the NFL level, but they are supporting him with everything that they possibly can to help elevate that part of his game. So just love what the Bears are doing this offseason. And I think that Justin Fields, right. I said the all-time Bears passing record, a little over 3,800 yards, but the really nuclear take would be that he becomes the first Bears quarterback to ever pass for 4,000 yards this year.
That's awesome. I love that. So let's say you're a Bears fan. We see Justin Fields throw for 4,000 yards, rush for 1,000 yards. They make the playoffs. Here's the question for you. Does he pass Jay Cutler on your all-time favorite quarterback list?
If he goes for 4,000 and 1,000, yeah. But right now, Jay Cutler's still my guy. That being said, though, I'm expecting a pretty big diff in the rushing output. Last year, it's not like they were drawing up a lot of rushes for him. There weren't a lot of designed run calls. It was just the play breaking down and, the offensive line letting people through and his receivers' inability to get open downfield. And then he'd end up scrambling for his life. So this year, I'm expecting a little bit more, 500 to 600 yards passing because I want to see him in the pocket. We've seen it with Josh Allen and we saw it last year with Jalen Hurts. We talked about it with Kyler Murray. If you want long-term success in the NFL, you have to do it as a passer. So I think what they're doing right now is setting themselves up where they're in a position where they built a strong team around Justin Fields. So if he takes that step forward, awesome. The Bears are ready to go. They've got a good offense. And if he doesn't, they can go draft Caleb Williams or Drake May next year. They've got 2 first-round picks, which they can hopefully use to move up in the draft. And then they can put a rookie quarterback, reset that rookie contract window, and have a good supporting cast around him. That's obviously worst-case scenario, though. I'm predicting that Justin Fields takes that step forward.
Yeah, and a lot of people forget how great of a passer he was when he was at Ohio State. It's like this is now an offensive line that gets a little bit better. The weapons get a little bit better. I'm with it. Speaking of a situation that gets better, we're talking nuclear takes here, Mung. Lamar Jackson in 2023. You've been talking about it for months. I've been drafting him everywhere for months. Just how hot is Lamar Jackson going to be in 2023?
Well, I think Dave will appreciate this take with that Lamar jersey hanging up behind him for those of you who are watching on the YouTube channel. But my nuclear take here is that Lamar Jackson will not only be the overall fantasy QB1, but he will repeat as MVP as he did in 2019. And I don't even think it's that crazy of a take. From weeks 1 to 12 last year, prior to the knee sprain, Lamar was the QB5 in fantasy points per game. And in the first 4 weeks of 2022, prior to Rashad Bateman's foot injury, Lamar was the fantasy QB1 in both points per game and overall. So if we're going to assume that Rashad Bateman is going to be back fairly healthy, if Odell Beckham is even 60 to 70% of his peak form, and if Zay Flowers can be even adequate as a receiver as a rookie, I think Lamar Jackson's poised to absolutely crush his previous career highs in both passing yardage and touchdowns, especially with Todd Monken expected to increase the Ravens' pass rate and pace of play. To me, it's kind of crazy that Lamar's being drafted a full round behind Mahomes on underdog. In Dynasty, even in super flex formats, he's dropping to the 6th, 7th, 8th overall picks. He's my QB1 for 2023, and I've already bet him to win MVP at plus 1,500. So I'm all in.
I'm with you. He's got the Lamar Jackson jersey behind him for Dave. I know we were talking about it when we were on your show. I mean, Lamar Jackson, doesn't even feel like a hot take. But, I mean, Dave, it wasn't that long ago where we were talking about a contract situation. I know you and I wanted him to go to Atlanta. We were talking about all this and that, Lamar Jackson in Dynasty was moving outside the top 6, outside the top 8 because of that unknown, contract situation. Now that he gets that contract, I mean, how high up do you have him this year for 2023? Because I have not seen anybody have him outside that top 5, 6. He looks like a smash as a top 5 quarterback.
Yeah, that's where he's at, is 5 for me, and I never wavered. I've been betting on the talent and trusting that things would work out, and even if he didn't re-sign with Baltimore, he was going to land in a spot that would have been fine. He's just kind of we saw kind of the worst case scenario when he was playing with Devin Duvernay as his wide receiver 1, and didn't have the best offensive line for a couple of years there, and he was still able to put up elite fantasy production. So I think anybody moving him, I mean, I did a startup last offseason, a super flex startup, where I was able to get him at the 10th overall pick. Just absolutely blew my mind that he was sliding that far because of this uncertainty. I'm completely with Lamar as a top 5 dynasty quarterback still.
Yeah, I got him at 112 in Smash Except 8. It blew my mind. It was just like instant value. You guys both took my quarterback guys that I had ones written up for. So we're going to get a little bit of bonus content with Dad. But for me, my Dynasty Dad approved buy is Deshaun Watson. I think Deshaun Watson bounced back. And, this is a guy that's been a top 5 quarterback every season from 2018 to 2020. We know what happened, over the last year and a half. Obviously, there was some issues up and down. But this is a guy that I think finishes as a top 8 quarterback who throws for 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns in Cleveland. Dave, is that too hot to talk about Deshaun Watson? We saw him shake some of that rust off towards the end. He looks great from everything I've seen in training camp. Add Elijah Moore, Amari Cooper. It looks fantastic. David Njoku, I think, is going to have a phenomenal season. How high up do you have Deshaun Watson? I know it's on that fringe of being hot, not quite nuclear like you guys put out there.
Yeah, he's my Dynasty QB 8.
Okay.
I love Deshaun Watson. Got him at the start of the second round of SFB. And, you talk about insulated value. I hear you guys talk about that a lot on this show. I don't know if there's anybody with more insulated value than Deshaun Watson right now. If they cut him this year, they're eating like $280 million in dead cap. Next year, It's like $230 million. They're basically on the hook for $100 million plus in dead cap if they cut him anytime in the next 4 years. So basically, the Browns have to figure this out. They don't really have another choice. He is going to be their starter. And I like what they did this year. They went out and they traded for Elijah Moore. They used their first pick this year, which was a 3rd round pick because of the Deshaun Watson acquisition. But they used that pick on Cedric Tillman. They re-signed David Njoku, like you said. So he is surrounded by really, really good playmakers this year. And then Amari Cooper. I mean, he's still going to be there for a couple more years. Just steady Eddie. I mean, the guy doesn't get the respect that he deserves, but any year that he has played 16 plus games, he has caught at least 1,000 yards. And now you've got a hopefully revitalized Elijah Moore on a new offense. So I am completely in on a Deshaun Watson bounce back. I was trying to buy him for low as much as I can in as many dynasty leagues as I could last year. It seems like a lot of people now are starting to warm up to the idea that he's going to be a better quarterback. You're not getting him for quite as cheap as you were last year, but yeah, if you can get him for, anything below market value, I'm getting that without thinking twice.
Yeah, and that's one Mung and I have been on since, February, where we were buying at a certain price where he was going late second. Now all of a sudden he's going early second. I'm seeing him go late first, in your super flex startups. And, the ceiling is right there, right behind where Lamar Jackson is, right behind where Justin Herbert is, in that same area as Fields and Lawrence. And a lot of people are acting like that's a bold take. And for me, there's just so much talent there. It wasn't long ago where we were saying he was a top 3 dynasty quarterback talent-wise. He still is. It's just got to get back into form. Dave, we talked, Deshaun Watson had a little bit of a rough patch. No quarterback had more of a rough patch last year than, just predicting a breakout to absolute decimation of value than your next quarterback.
Yeah, and I'm just going to straight up recycle this take from when we did our show a couple of weeks ago when I talked about Russell Wilson. I just can't look at last year as anything other than an obvious outlier. It was a career low touchdown rate, career high interception rate, and new coach, new team, new city, new scheme, all that stuff. It's understandable that there were going to be some growing pains there with his first year in Denver. But if you look historically, he was a top 10 quarterback for 8 straight seasons. And in 4 of those 8 seasons, he was a top 3 quarterback or better. So they beefed up the offensive line with Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers. They brought in Samaje Perine to help alleviate some of the things that he can't do with his legs anymore. Got him a good safety valve to catch the ball out of the backfield as well. Got Tim Patrick back. Hopefully Javonte Williams is back at some point this year. Reports are that Courtland Sutton is actually shaking off that rust and looking good again. So I don't want to, sit here and tout Courtland Sutton, but they have a ton of weapons on there. I haven't even talked about Jerry Jeudy and Greg Dulcich and Albert Okwuegbunam. I mean, no dearth of talent there in Denver. They also traded up to get Marvin Mims this year and then tie it all together with Sean Payton. They went out and they traded a first-round pick to bring in Sean Payton, much like we were just saying with Deshaun Watson and the insulated value there. This is an ironclad contract. Denver cannot get out of this deal with Russ Wilson, so they're going to have to make it work. And it seems like they're doing everything they can to put him in a position to succeed and bounce back this year.
I love that because, and I don't want to skip around too many position-wise, but Greg Dulcich is one of my hot takes. He's someone that I've been buying everywhere. If you can make the case, obviously he had college dominator, downfield rate, athletic. I mean, he's a guy that's an absolute freak. He had the draft capital, rookie production. The system looks fantastic. And, Sean Payton likes to target the tight end. It's something that's definitely going to happen there. I think this is a season where Greg Dulcich is a outlier, top 5 tight end type season if they use him properly. And I know that's about as hot as it gets when we talk about the tight end position, but if you say top 12, that's not really a thing, right? Like if you're a top 12 tight end, that happens all the time. So we're not really getting too nuclear there with that. Love the Denver situation. Let's move to your quarterback, Mung. You have a second quarterback here who you have as a super hot take.
Yeah, and again, to me, these don't feel like super hot takes, but I think the majority of the community would disagree. And my number 2 is that Tua Tagovailoa will outscore Justin Herbert this year. A lot of people love Herbert. The Kellen Moore hiring as offensive coordinator has really supercharged his fantasy outlook. And look, I like Herbert. I think he's a top 10 QB in fantasy and in real life. They added Quentin Johnston, but at the same time, I don't know that this offense is going to change a ton under Moore other than increased efficiency, which I would project anyway with Herbert being healthy this year. Look, last year, LA was already 5th in pass rate over expectation, 6th in red zone pass rate over expectation. Both of those were higher than the Cowboys under Kellen Moore, and the Chargers were already 4th in neutral situational pace. So it's not like they weren't playing fast already. I think that Herbert's going to be good. Like I said, top 10. But again, when you look at Tua, he was already QB 10 in fantasy points per game last year, even with some down games after the concussions. Plus, that was the first year under Mike McDaniel and his offensive scheme. And then now on top of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, they added another big play threat in Devon Achane. The only argument here against Tua is health, but I've brought up before that while he is somewhat of a risk, it's not a foregone conclusion that he has to miss time in 2023. Devontae Adams suffered multiple concussions back in 2017. His ADP dipped the following year in 2018 when he ended up finishing as the overall wide receiver 1. And he plays a position where he takes a lot more hits and tackles. So I think Tua is really, really undervalued right now. I think that the Dolphins have a shot at the AFC East and could even be Super Bowl contenders as long as Tua stays healthy. And I absolutely love him in fantasy this year.
These are some of my favorite shows because we talk about them and we're putting out hot takes, right? We're saying things that are, high range of outcomes, and they feel good right now though, right? Like we like to tell ourselves in Dynasty and in the fantasy football community, Dave, that we start to believe certain narratives and we really start to push that way. And since you've gotten a lot more in the industry and full time, like how do you check yourself on some of those narratives? Like who are those guys that you trust? What's the process that you go through, right? Because this is a fun show. This is where we talk about, these are our takes. This would be awesome if this happens, because we can see these realm of possibilities. But how do you, fade out the noise of what's a real narrative to believe and what's one that just, someone's leading you down the wrong path?
I'm very selective about the content that I consume. I have a very short list of people who I'll listen to and follow. But yeah, shows like this are a lot of fun because we are just talking about the best, highest range of outcomes here. And while I agree with everything that Mung said there, I don't know why you had to bring Justin Herbert into it. I mean, couldn't you have just said that like Tua was going to be a top 5 quarterback? Why do you got to slander my boy Herbert like that? Like, what did he ever do? Why is he catching strays here?
If Tua's top 5, somebody's got to drop out of the top 5 or 6, right?
Fair enough, but I don't know if it's going to be a Herbert, man. I could have just as easily, one of my hot takes could have been Herbert being QB1 overall this year, expecting big things from him. But yeah, Mike, that's a good question. And I think you just got to learn to trust some of the people that you listen to. I'm big on kind of keeping the circle tight and trying not to bring in too much. I like to try to analyze the sport with as little noise as possible. So I know it sounds crazy because I'm a podcaster and a writer, but I really don't listen to all that many podcasts and read all that many articles. I like to kind of evaluate things from as blank of a slate as I can.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Like when I first started this whole process about 4 years ago, I used to listen to everybody's podcast, right? Because it was like, oh, I want to get this in. I want to soak it all in. And, at this point, like I listen to yours a little bit. I'll do some things with football guys, and Chad Parsons over at UTH, but there isn't much. You want to come out with your own individual content and talk about individual content. Let's talk about these rookie running backs. Let's switch over to running backs. 2 running backs will finish as top 12, but Bijan Robinson finishes as the RB1 overall. All right. You look at what Tyler Algiers did last year from week 13 on, 18 carries, over 100 yards in every single one. And that's a 5th round running back. Now you enter Bijan Robinson, and this is an area where I think he gets 320 plus touches. This is an area where I think he absolutely smashes at the position for receptions, and he breaks Eric Dickerson's 1983 rookie fantasy points record, and we talk about what has to be involved to be an RB1 overall, and I want to, for context, shout out to my boy Alex Caruso. 9 of the last 10 players that have been RB1 overall are 25 or younger. Checks that. 11 of the last 12 are guys that are drafted inside the top 12, and no one's repeated. So, I mean, I want to say it's Christian McCaffrey. I want to go this route. I want to move this way. So if you guys remember, 3 years ago, I said it was going to be Alvin Kamara. That actually hit. 2 years ago, I said it was going to be Jonathan Taylor. Last year was Christian McCaffrey. So if you look at points per game, he was right there. For me, Bijan Robinson has the ability to be the RB1 overall in not just Dynasty, but in redraft this season. Dave, is that too hot? I absolutely love Bijan Robinson, and I drafted him everywhere. A lot of people are saying, hey, let's move off him. Let's see if we can tier back and get a little bit more value. But man, the sky's the limit for this guy.
Yeah, I think he's going to be really good. I don't know if I agree that he's worth holding in all formats. I had the 101 in one league, and I did trade it away just because I felt like the hype got a little bit crazy there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that he is likely to finish as the RB1. The main thing is Arthur Smith, which I don't know if I missed it if you mentioned it or not. But I mean, Arthur Smith is just going to relentlessly pound the rock, and that's why they spent that 8th overall pick on Bijan. So love that call out, but also like that you very sneakily slipped in Jahmyr Gibbs there, which I just said the other day. One of my kind of hot takes that I've been talking about a little bit on shows and stuff recently is that the only reason Jahmyr Gibbs isn't getting drafted in, the middle of the second round or the 1-2 turn is because of Bijan. I think that drafters and rankers are terrified to put 2 rookies inside their top 10. But if you look at Gibbs's profile, where he was drafted, his target share in college, his landing spot, and all those things, there's no reason Gibbs shouldn't be getting drafted, talking about 2023 leagues as a top 5, top 6 running back.
Yeah, and running backs that get drafted where he did, they don't miss. And you're right. I mean, if Bijan didn't go before him at 8, if this is last year's class and Gibbs goes 12, or even, like in that as the only guy to go in that area, it's an absolute smash. And so many people have gotten crazy value. I saw a guy the other day. He goes, "Hey, I have the 101 and the guy at the 102 is offering me 224 firsts to move up for Bijan." Jahmyr Gibbs and 224 firsts. I mean, you could argue one, but this is a situation where you can extrapolate some serious value. But I do think Bijan Robinson absolutely owns this year and just dominates in 2023. Dave, we're talking about guys that hit. There's a running back out there, and I know you've been digging deep on this, who might not hit on your list.
Yeah, so I don't know how much time you want to spend on this, but I woke up this morning and I just wanted to breathe fire all over Alexander Mattison. I felt like the hype was just getting too out of control. So I spent all day today writing about a 2,000-word article on Alexander Mattison. And the title of this article is Alexander Mattison is the dead zone running back to avoid this year. And I think people just got a little bit too excited. And, I can look at all the numbers and all that, but I think really what happened here is Mike, Mung, you guys know it. I mean, we have wanted Alexander Mattison to break out for years. We've been acquiring him whenever we could since 2020. We get this idea that he's this one-to-one replacement for Dalvin Cook. And when he stepped in those spot starts, he was unbelievable. But I don't think that people realize that his efficiency just fell off a cliff last year. I mean, there isn't one single efficiency metric you can find that he didn't set a career low in last year. And he did that on very low volume as well, which is another thing that scares me. I looked at his splits without Dalvin Cook. So, taking those 6 starts out of the equation, and he's actually seeing less touches under Kevin O'Connell than he did over his 4 years or his 3-year stint with Mike Zimmer. And then on top of that, I talk about these 6 starts, and everybody uses that, he scored over 20 points per game in the games that he started, but that is missing a huge chunk of context here. So I looked at the 6 starts that he had, and 4 of those 6 starts were against bottom 4 defenses in the league. We're talking about the Lions, the Seahawks between 20 and 2021, which was just absolutely terrible. The 2 times that he had to play up against a good defense, which was week 6 in 2020, he played against the Falcons, and then week 16 in 2021 against the Rams. In those matchups, he averaged 33 rushing yards, 16 receiving yards, and less than 10 fantasy points per game. Now you look at those splits against the Detroit Lions and the Seattle Seahawks, which were absolutely terrible those years. That's where he was putting up 103 rushing yards, 46 receiving yards, a touchdown per game, and averaging nearly 30 points per game. So we're looking at this very muddy data where he had a handful of starts against very, very bad defenses, and it's making people think he's something that he's not. I just look at the competition that they have right there. Ty Chandler, Kenny Nwangu, may not have been the best players so far in their career, but they're both 200 plus pounds. They both profile to take on a significant work. And I'm just afraid that, this projected volume that we're talking about with Alexander Mattison, people are calling it guaranteed volume. I just think it's irresponsible to say that when you've got other talented backs there, and we still have Fournette and Zeke and Kareem Hunt, and who knows, maybe even Dalvin Cook. They had a $7 million offer on the table for him. I think they end up adding a running back. So right now we're looking at what we expect to be, just a replacement for Dalvin Cook, when the reality is Alexander Mattison hasn't been that good in the last couple of years. I don't know if the new coaching staff trusts him, and he just feels like he has bust written all over him this year.
Yeah, I mean, I put out a thread today on Khalil Herbert, a similar type situation where a guy is a backup running back. But if you look at the trajectory of him, Khalil Herbert was efficient and played well. Alexander Mattison, the absolute opposite. And right now they're flip-flopped in ADP, exactly where they're at. And I love that take because I think a lot of people are really too high on Mattison. We're talking about, potential backup running back guys getting an opportunity. Mung, you and Dave both have the same guy here. And, I'm starting to believe a little bit in his counterpart because I've started to take him in dynasty drafts and everything like that. But you have a bold take on someone here who's definitely outside the top 30 dynasty running backs.
Yeah, my hot take here is that Damian Harris will outscore Dameon Pierce in 2023, which I know people are absolutely going to hate. But here's my outlook. Ramondre Stevenson was very good last year, but there's a reason that Damian Harris saw more carries than Stevenson in the games that both were healthy. Now, Harris isn't a super efficient runner, nor does he have the speed to break away for those flashy long touchdown runs that we all love. But at the same time, he's 5'10", 220-pound hammer. And prior to a hamstring injury in week 5 last year, Harris scored 3 touchdowns in the Patriots' first 4 games, and he was a top 20 running back in PPR points per game. Now, Josh Allen has already said this offseason that while he's still going to run and scramble and do some of the great things that we love seeing Josh Allen do, he may not run quite as much as he has in prior years. And there's a reason that the Bills, who are a divisional rival of the Patriots, quickly signed Harris in free agency. I bet that they remember when a healthy Damian Harris ran for over 200 yards and 4 touchdowns in their 2 matchups back in 2021. So when the snow and the winds pick up in December and January in Buffalo, I think Harris could see a ton of work, especially over the second half of the season and most critically in the fantasy playoffs. And finally, maybe this is a little bit too much galaxy braining, but Damian Harris gets a Swiss cheese Chargers run defense in week 16 in the fantasy semifinals. And then week 17, the fantasy championships, he gets a revenge game against the New England Patriots.
That is spicy. Dave, I'm starting to come around on James Cook a little bit. You know, I was completely out on him, and the Buffalo offense is fantastic. You want as many pieces as possible in that scenario. How do you see this backfield running back, or shaking out between the 2 running backs? What kind of split? A lot of people are really in on Cook. A lot of people are really in on Harris. Mung and I always talk about, let's take the cheapest volume here. I mean, both these guys right now, James Cook's still worth a little bit less than a first. You could probably get him for a pair of seconds. Damian Harris, you could definitely get for a second. Mung and I have been getting him almost as an add-on. You're like, you get a deal close. Hey, I'll throw you a third if you throw me Damian Harris. Let's get this thing done. Let's go into that area. So talk to me a little bit about that Buffalo situation, because everybody wants a piece. Which side should they be on?
One of the trades I made recently was having Ramondre Stevenson, and I flipped him for Damian Harris, Khalil Herbert in a second. And I'm just not a huge believer in Ramondre being the long-term option there. I just think that Damian Harris is such an underrated asset. And this was before the Buffalo trade, so I was really happy to see him get that good landing spot.
Mm-hmm.
But, we saw Devin Singletary was just consistently churning out RB2 seasons, and he was getting pigeonholed into a role that he wasn't really fit for. I mean, they were asking him to run between the tackles and be the goal line back and then do some things out in the passing game. They were kind of asking him to be a do-it-all back, and that's not really what he can do well. Damian Harris is bigger, stronger, faster, more powerful, more burst. I mean, he does everything better than Devin Singletary. So if Devin Singletary could turn out back-to-back-to-back RB2 seasons, I don't see any reason that Damian Harris couldn't as well. And then James Cook, really exciting player, led the league in breakaway run rate last year. But I think that he is just destined for this kind of change of pace role where you're going to see 6 to 8 carries per game, maybe a few targets here and there, and he'll break off some big plays. But I just don't think he has the frame to ever really take on a significant role. He's just going to be kind of a boomer bust player. When he's able to rip off a big play and score a touchdown, you're happy. And the weeks that he doesn't, he's going to be putting up 3-4 points in your lineup.
Yeah, and Damian Harris is a goal line machine. I mean, it was just 2 years ago he was winning you fantasy championships, getting those starts late in the season. I'm glad you said Ramondre Stevenson, because that's my next one on my hot take is so we talked about New England's situation being bad, right? And this is more just volume type opportunity. But if you look at Ramondre Stevenson, my hot take is that he has over 100 targets this year. Ramondre Stevenson last year, 58% of route participation, 82 targets. That was, among running backs was up towards the top. This is a situation where they are going to need someone to step up. And I think Ramondre Stevenson has the chops there. I'm excited to see him. I like him, as a top 10 to 12 running back this year. And I enjoy him in Dynasty as well, and I know you said you might feel like he might not be the long-term answer there, but I got to get me some more Ramondre Stevenson. You got to get into that area. Any more running back hot takes before we move on to the wide receivers? I feel like running back's one that we could hit on, 10 to 15 of them because it's fun. Mung, there's a guy that I know I've promoted in the past, and I've been like, hey, buy this guy, buy this guy, buy this guy. And now I think you're starting to come around on him for 2023.
Right. And Dynasty GMs are not going to want to hear this because it's an old running back. He might as well be 75 in the eyes of most Dynasty GMs. But I think Alvin Kamara is going to be a top 12 fantasy running back once again in 2023. I know he's being left for dead right now. The efficiency wasn't great last season as a runner, but do we really care that much? Because Kamara was still uber productive as a receiver out of the backfield in 2022. He ranked 11th in routes run, 6th in yards per route run. He was also the RB7 last year in expected fantasy points per game. but finished as just the RB13 in actual points per game due to a lack of touchdowns. But considering that the Raiders ranked 15th in targets to running backs under Josh McDaniels' new offensive scheme last year, but from 2014 to 2021 with Derek Carr as the starter, the Raiders never finished lower than 12th in targets to running backs, and they finished 6 times in the top 8 in running back targets. So even with Jamal Williams in that Mark Ingram role, vulturing some touchdowns, Taysom Hill probably vulturing a couple as well, I think Kamara can still be a back-end RB1 just on projected receiving usage. And I mentioned on the last show that I think it's likely Kamara is going to be suspended probably 2 to 4 games, outside shot of 6 or 0. But I think he can be a top 12 fantasy running back in points per game and possibly even overall if he outperforms in some touchdown expectations.
Fantastic. See, you guys are, when we were on Football Guys, you guys were talking the same guy. Now we got the same guys again when we're talking about breakouts. You had Damian Harris. Dave, Mung says that Marquise Brown will be a top 15 wide receiver. Your hot take was top 20. Is 20 nuclear enough? You know, should we go top 15? And tell me why you're so much, and I think both of you guys talked about it on your podcast, why you're so in on Marquise Brown for 2023.
So I think so much of where he finishes this season, if you got week 1 here and week 17 here, wherever Kyler Murray can come back. You know, if Kyler Murray comes back week 3 or week 4, he's got top 10 in his range of outcomes. But if he's coming back late in this season, then I'm tempering expectations a little bit. But, you know, we did talk about it on my show. And for years, we saw in Baltimore that Marquise Brown was just a ticking time bomb. I mean, his per route metrics were just off the charts, and we were waiting for it all to come together. And then we saw it come together last year on a team with a suspended DeAndre Hopkins, a team with a high neutral script pass rate, a team with a hyper efficient Kyler Murray. What did he do over that stretch? He averaged 10.7 targets per game. He was a wide receiver 5 in PPR scoring. He was just an absolute target hog, carving up defenses, scoring touchdowns, doing everything that we've wanted him to see during this whole, you know, frustrating career that he had in Baltimore before that. So now with DeAndre Hopkins out of the picture, I'm expecting him to just, you know, there's nobody else that's going to challenge him for targets there. I'm not that concerned about Michael Wilson or Greg Dortch or Rondale Moore. It is going to be the Marquise Brown show in Arizona. So even if we do have kind of a rough start to the season with Clayton Tune or Colt McCoy or whoever it may be, when Kyler Murray returns, Marquise Brown is going back to that elite wide receiver 1 status, and he's just going to be a hammer down the stretch to help you win your playoffs.
When do you anticipate Kyler Murray? Because that's the big question. I got him in Scott Fishbowl in the 7th round. I feel like that's almost a cheat code because if he comes back, he's eyeing week 1, right? And a lot of people are saying week 6, week 9, you know, in that area. Man, if he comes back in a situation like in redraft and in the Scott Fishbowl, this is an area where if you're playing Superflex and you get him that deep into the league, it's like having another QB1 right there, right off the bat.
Yeah, and I'm pulling up the schedule right now. I was looking at this recently, and I think that week 10 would be the latest that we see him come back because they have a really soft schedule leading up to their week 14 bye. So if he can come back for week 10, they get Atlanta, Houston, the Rams, and then the Steelers. I mean, 4 cake matchups before he can rest up before the bye. So I would expect to see him back before week 10, but hopefully sooner. I mean, the week 1 would be kind of crazy, but, we hear like it's typically an 8 to 9 month timetable for quarterbacks to return after an ACL. So looking at that timetable, ideally, he is back by week 3 or 4. The big thing with Kyler Murray, though, is even if he does return, coming off of that ACL, he probably isn't going to have the mobility right off of the back. But that's just good news for Marquise Brown, which means even more targets going his way, less scrambling from Kyler Murray. Obviously, when Kyler's scrambling, he's at his best and he's a more efficient passer. But either way, when Kyler Murray returns, Marquise Brown is just going to be a stud wide receiver 1 again.
Going from a wide receiver who left Baltimore, Mung, to a wide receiver who's currently in Baltimore. I mean, if you're gonna hype up Lamar Jackson as much as you are, who's catching those passes?
Well, real quick before I get to the player, I just want to say that I think it's important when you do off-season projections that you're looking at team level projections, right? Does it make sense? If you're high on one player, does it correlate then to other players? Do the projections make sense, right? Can you have Justin Fields with 5,000 passing yards? Probably not. 4,000 if you get the projections, if you do the math, maybe. So for me, I'm super high on the Baltimore Ravens, and I'm super high on Zay Flowers, who for some reason is being the latest drafted rookie wide receiver, even though he was drafted in the exact same range in the first round of the NFL draft alongside Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, and Quentin Johnston. And Flowers was a 94th percentile college dominator, 89th percentile college target share. And then I just don't get it because, quote unquote, Baltimore is a bad landing spot and Flowers has the most target competitions are the two arguments I've heard the most this offseason. And quite frankly, I disagree on both counts. Again, the Ravens offense is projected to be at least average in pass rate and pace under their new offensive coordinator. I think a lot of people still have that old Greg Roman offense in their heads. And yes, Mark Andrews is projected to be the number one target, but look at the other rookie wide receivers, right? JSN has Metcalf and Lockett in Seattle. Quentin Johnston will be battling for targets with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams if they're healthy. Jordan Addison will be playing with one of the best wide receivers in the league and a target hog in Justin Jefferson, plus a solid receiving tight end as well in TJ Hawkinson. So when you look at it, is it really that crazy to think that Flowers could be the number two target over Rashad Bateman coming back from a major foot injury and Odell Beckham, who said he didn't even have an ACL when he was playing on the Rams a couple of years ago? I think it's not that crazy, and I don't think it's that nuclear of a take to say that Zay Flowers is going to be the highest scoring rookie wide receiver in fantasy this year over JSN, over Jordan Addison, and over Quentin Johnston.
Perfect segue to mine, because Jordan Addison is going to be the wide receiver one out of this class for 2023. In Dynasty, it is JSN, no doubt about it. But you look at what Adam Thielen's vacating. Adam Thielen, at 32 years old, completely washed, finished as wide receiver 36. 74 receptions, 107 targets, 716 yards, 6 touchdowns. And oh, by the way, 15 red zone receptions. That's second in the NFL. And 22 red zone targets. That's sixth in the NFL. I don't think it's a stretch to say that Jordan Addison is a guy that I think finishes as a top 24 wide receiver in an offense that, you know, Dave was mentioning about Alexander Mattison. I think this offense has to throw more. And I think Kirk Cousins has a fantastic season. And kind of like, you know, what we've seen from Chase and Higgins, I think Jordan Addison fills in that secondary role and is a guy that I feel finishes as a wide receiver 2 in 2023. Dave,
this is the time where I say Quentin Johnston is going to be the rookie wide receiver one.
Let's just hit them all.
And then let's call up John and have him tout JSN for us. Let's just round it all out.
Hey, if right now, I mean, I think, you know, JSN's talent is phenomenal. If he landed in either of these situations, we're talking in that same area. So wide receiver 2 right now that we're going to talk about is a guy that's been top 5, top 8, year in, year out. And Dave, there's a guy that you don't think is going to be even a wide receiver 1 in 2023.
Yeah, you know, looking through all of the takes that I laid out, this might be the spiciest one because Davante Adams has just been a stud. And I will say that, you know, talent-wise, I think he's the second best receiver in the league behind Justin Jefferson. But I absolutely despise what the Raiders are doing. I think that Josh McDaniels is just a huge fraud. I don't think that he belongs as an NFL coach. And then looking at what they're trying to do with Jimmy Garoppolo, pairing him up with Davante Adams is just a terrible pairing. Davante Adams historically, and Mung, I know you've got the numbers because we've talked about this before in chats, and I don't have them off the top of my head, but the majority of Davante Adams' touchdowns have come deep downfield. You know, he's had a gunslinger in Aaron Rodgers and a gunslinger in Derek Carr. And then you've got Jimmy Garoppolo, who's the complete opposite. He is a check down machine, and he would get, you know, benefit from yards after the catch from Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and Raheem Mostert and the other guys there in San Francisco. So what you're asking Davante Adams to do if he wants to pair up well with Jimmy Garoppolo is to drop his ADOT and completely change his game rather than winning routes 15, 20 yards downfield. He's going to be catching screens and slants and trying to do things after the catch. And while he can do that, it's going to dramatically limit his upside. So maybe I'm an idiot for betting against one of the best players in the NFL, but looking at some of the target competition there with Jacoby Myers and Hunter Renfrow, and then not knowing if they're going to have Josh Jacobs there now to help, you know, keep defenses honest. I'm just really worried about the Raiders offense as a whole, and specifically Davante Adams, especially with where he's going in the late first round. That's just way too rich for me to draft him.
Yeah, the talent is undeniable. I mean, Devontae Adams is an absolute stud, and I hate betting against guys that do that, but I can see that in the realm of possibilities. And I like that. For me, I'm betting on in the opposite direction. I'm Mr. Positivity. I don't like to go negative. For me, Chris Olave will be a wide receiver one, if not a top 10 wide receiver this year. You look at guys yards per route run. As a rookie that did it over 2.25 yards per route run. He's one of just 7 guys that have done that. The other ones, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, Jalen Waddle, Justin Jefferson, and Tyreek Hill. I mean, this guy is the next big breakout wide receiver, and I love that he got, Derek Carr in the mix. This is a guy that I'm buying everywhere in Dynasty, and I feel it's not even that hot, but he's going to be, after wide receiver 26 last year or 25, he will be a top 10 wide receiver in 2023. Mung, hit us up with another wide receiver hot take.
I don't think I have any. I think Marquise Brown was going to be someone that I agreed on with Dave, and we'll go with that one. I'm just going to concur with Dave. He and I were aligned on Marquise Brown, I believe, last offseason. Yeah. And I'll go with that. And I'll also back him up on Devontae Adams, where I don't think he should be off anybody's draft boards, but I'll put it this way. As Dave was talking, I was checking my exposure on Underdog, and I have 1.3% Devontae Adams and 11.3% Jacoby Myers in that Julian Edelman type role with Josh McDaniels. So again, I think he's fine. We know Adams has all the talent in the world. I just don't know that the efficiency is going to be there with Garoppolo and McDaniels, whereas I do think Shanahan was propping up Garoppolo's numbers a little bit.
Dave, the tight end position, and I'm glad you have this guy because I have 17 dynasty rosters and he's on 14 of them. He is one of my most owned. Him and Dalton Kincaid are my 2 most owned dynasty tight ends. And you have my man, Darren Waller, with a big-time resurgence here. Talk to me about why, because I absolutely love this take.
So I've got him as my tight end 3 going into 2023 fantasy football drafts right now, which sounds crazy. But for me, it's Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews, who are pretty much neck and neck. Obviously giving the slight edge to Kelce, but then Waller is close behind. And, for whatever reason, he is getting faded. And I guess, it's because of the age and because of the hamstrings. And those are certainly viable reasons to be concerned. But when you start looking at the numbers and trying to determine, how much are the Giants going to pass and where are those targets going to go and where are those yards and touchdowns going to go, you realize that Darren Waller is in for a huge serving of volume this year. I mean, it was kind of a running joke this offseason that they just signed nothing but slot receivers. They need somebody that's going to be a red zone presence, and that's Darren Waller. They need somebody that can beat press coverage on the outside. That's Darren Waller. They need somebody that can make contested catches deep downfield. It is Darren Waller. I mean, he is going to be the X factor in this offense. They've got a lot of small guys that can do some fun things in space, but at the end of the day, he is going to be the offensive focal point in that passing game. So I'm taking ahead of TJ Hawkinson, ahead of George Kittle, ahead of Kyle Pitts, ahead of Dallas Goedert. He is locked in as my tight end 3 for this season.
If you said he was going to be above Mark Andrews, you were going to catch some hands from Mung. Mung's talked about Mark Andrews every single podcast, hits his mandatory guys. So we're going to skip where he's at on your hot take. Mung, there's another tight end. You have a little bit of a hot take there, right? I don't want to take it away. It's just like me last year. We were like, Dad, stop talking about Jalen Hurts breaking out as that guy. Stop it. We got to get off the Mark Andrews until the next podcast. So go for it, buddy.
You guys can go back and listen to some of the older shows, or I'll plug my Fantrax article. I talked about Mark Andrews versus Travis Kelce's 2023 projections on there. So go check that out. But I also have a lot of Dalton Schultz, who I think is being supremely undervalued. And my hot take, my nuclear take for 2023 is that Dalton Schultz will outscore Evan Ingram, Pat Freiermuth, and Dave Njoku, all guys who are being drafted above him in redraft and dynasty. Look, Houston's defense should be improved under DeMeco Ryans, but there's still not that much talent on that roster outside of Will Anderson on the defensive side of the ball. This is a team that's probably going to get into some shootouts and catch-up game scripts. That plus a middling offensive line is probably going to lead to quite a few check-down targets to none other than Dalton Schultz. And look, nobody expects Schultz to be Andrews or Kelce or even Waller after the catch, but he can see a lot of volume, much like Zach Ertz did last year in Arizona prior to his injury. Mm-hmm. Schultz has proven to be a solid contested catch guy, a red zone target as well. And look, rookie quarterbacks often rely on their tight ends as their safety blankets. And this should hold especially true for CJ Stroud, who has said himself that, quote, if my job was to run the ball, I'd be a running back. I throw the ball for a living. So while he has the mobility to run for some yards on scrambles, Stroud has preferred to find his receivers downfield instead. And I think Schultz is the cheapest tight end right now who has a fair chance to actually lead his team in targets. But he's being written off simply because he went from Dallas to Houston, which is not as exciting of an offense. Let's also not forget that Schultz is on a 1-year, $6 million prove-it deal, so he has ample motivation to produce this season and get the bag from a team next offseason.
All right, so Dave, I don't know if you know this, but we now have 2 podcasts. We have the Smash Accept, and then we have one called Smash or Pass. And we do things where it's market values, but we have in our Patreon, the amount of people we said, Dave Kluge's coming on. We got to start talking about some of their hot takes. So, it's time to get Kluge. You're going to either smash or pass. So it's smash if you like the take, pass if you don't. Your first one's from Dizzy Dave. He said that DK Metcalf finishes outside the top 20 wide receivers. Smash or pass?
Smash. That was I took so much heat for that take a couple of years ago when I said that I like DK Metcalf, but I don't know if he's going to be this bona fide alpha everyone wants him to be. So I'm completely with that one.
This one's a little bit we talked about, but Glenny says that Lamar Jackson not only finishes as the QB1, but wins the MVP in 2023.
Smash. I've already got a bet down for a Lamar MVP.
All right, this one from our guy questions_snack. It's not super hot take, but Jamar Chase clearly finishes as the wide receiver 1 overall in his 3rd season. Smash or pass?
Pass. Cooper Kupp, man. People forget how good this guy is. He's put up 30-plus points in 1 in 3 outings over the last 2 years. If he's healthy, he's the wide receiver 1.
Corey P33. Now here's your Quentin Johnson. Quentin Johnson finishes as the most fantasy points for a rookie wide receiver and the most among all Charger wide receivers. Smash or pass?
That's going to be a double pass. And, I didn't get a chance to talk on it earlier, Mike, but I'm actually with you on the Jordan Addison wide receiver 1. That's my rookie wide receiver 1 this year.
I love it. Dom Munoz says Roschon Johnson will be the lead back in Chicago and bell cow by week 7.
I don't know about a bell cow, but I think that his role in the passing game sets him up for a higher ceiling. So I actually have him ranked as my RB1 for Chicago.
I love this because we started a Patreon, so much positive interactions with the Smash Accept community. And when we said you were on, like, everybody's like, yeah, we got to get these answers. So a couple guys sent a couple, and this is just fun for me. So, like, question snack again says Devonta Smith outscores AJ Brown in 2023.
Ooh, I love that one. I am very bold. I'm going to pass on it, but I do love it. That's spicy. I like it.
There we go. We got another one that says Addison. This is from A-Bomb Diggity. He says, hold on, we have Algier puts up a second 1,000-yard season. I'm not sure if we're going on that one, but
predict injury for Bijan, I guess.
Yeah, there we go. Dino Fisherman says, this is spicy, man. And I was actually talking about this with a buddy the other day. He said Richie James will end the season with the most fantasy points of any Kansas City wide receiver.
Listen, I'm going to pass because it's spicy, but it is actually somewhat believable. I talked to my buddy Daniel Harms today, who is a film guy, loves the Chiefs. He does some intense breakdowns on the Chiefs, and he is all in on Richie James this year.
I like it because somebody's got to do it, right? We say it every year. Somebody's got to do it. And then one sent in from Q Bears. J.K. Dobbins is a top 10 running back in 2023.
Smashing that one too. Absolutely love it. J.K. Dobbins is one of my favorite players in the NFL. Mung, you already talked a little bit about how this Monken offense is going to really change things up in Baltimore. One of the biggest changes is going to be targets going J.K. Dobbins' way. We haven't seen it in his NFL career. We didn't see it in Ohio State, but he has the skills to be a pass catcher, and I'm hoping they can unlock it this year.
You guys heard it. That's one of Dave's favorite running backs. Dave, you're one of our favorite guests. It's always like family when you come back on here. We absolutely love it. We put it on our calendar every year. It's a good time. So why don't you tell everybody and if you guys don't follow Dave, you absolutely have to, at Dave Kluge, but tell everybody what you're working on.
Yeah, right now you can find all my content over at Football Guys, written, video, all that good stuff. But just follow me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. I share all of my content there. Anytime I'm doing any guest spots or anything like this, I share that as well. So just follow me on Twitter and you'll see what I'm up to.
And Mung, you know, I know this is that fun time of year. You always hit us up with someone in that final minute. One more quick hot take. Who you got?
Ooh, how about, let's see. You know, I'll push back on the Richie James one. If Kadarius Toney stays healthy, he will be a top 15 fantasy wide receiver this year. We'll leave that one. That's a big if, but if.
That's the bigger if. Will he play that many games? Hey, guys, thanks again for tuning in and enjoy the process. Oh, man.